Remember the dirt-poor kitchen hacks that prove seniors cook better than us? In the 1940s, our grandmothers knew skills that mattered. They turned bacon grease into 3 meals, boiled bones 5 times for broth, stretched one roast across a week, and every scrap mattered. Dirt poor didn't mean bad food. It meant genius nobody teaches anymore. These 30 hacks fed families through wars, then vanished. What did our grandmothers know? This wasn't just frugal, it was survival chemistry. After roasting a chicken, the bones went into a pot with water, onion scraps, celery, and bay leaf. They simmered for 4 to 6 hours, producing rich golden broth for soup or gravy. But here's the genius part. They didn't throw the bones away. The same bones were covered with fresh water and simmered again the next day for lighter broth used for cooking rice or making thinner soup. This process repeated 3, 4, sometimes 5 times until the bones crumbled to powder. Each boiling extracted different nutrients, collagen, calcium, marrow, until nothing remained. One chicken carcass fed a family for an entire week. Today we buy boxed broth for $4 and throw away chicken bones after one use, wasting 80% of their value. Seniors squeezed every molecule of nutrition from bones modern cooks treat as garbage. Seniors saved every drop of bacon grease not just for cooking but for making household soap. They rendered fat scraps, strained the grease through cheesecloth into jars, and when they had enough, mixed it with lye and water in careful proportions. The mixture was heated, stirred constantly, then poured into wooden molds to harden for weeks. The result was hard yellow soap that cleaned dishes, scrubbed clothes, and washed bodies. One batch lasted months. Making soap from bacon grease meant nothing was wasted. Fat that today gets poured down drains became a multi-purpose cleaning agent that cost $0. Modern dish soap costs $5 per bottle and contains chemicals we can't pronounce. Seniors made theirs from kitchen waste, and it worked just as well, proving their resourcefulness turned garbage into gold. A single Sunday pot roast fed a family for an entire week through genius meal planning. Sunday, roast beef with potatoes and carrots. Monday, sliced roast beef sandwiches with gravy. Tuesday, chopped leftover meat fried with potatoes for hash. Wednesday, diced meat added to vegetable soup made from the beef cooking liquid. Thursday, remaining scraps mixed with gravy and vegetables, topped with pastry for pot pie. Friday, any tiny pieces mixed into fried rice or croquettes. Saturday, the roast bone boiled for beef barley soup. Nothing was wasted, not one shred. Each transformation required skill and creativity to make the meal feel new and satisfying. Today we roast a beef, eat it once, throw away leftovers, and complain we can't afford groceries. Seniors made one $2 roast last 7 days through planning and skill modern cooks have completely forgotten. All right. Number 4 is getting more interesting, but wait, before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. Seniors never bought cooking fat because they rendered their own lard from meat scraps butchers gave away free. Pork fat trimmings, beef sweet, chicken skin, bacon ends, everything went into a heavy pot and simmered on low heat for hours until the fat melted and separated from the cracklings. They strained it through cheesecloth into glass jars where it solidified into pure white lard. This lard was used for frying, baking pie crusts, greasing pans, making biscuits, and flavoring vegetables. One rendering session produced enough cooking fat to last months. The leftover cracklings were salted and eaten as snacks or crumbled into cornbread. Today we pay $6 for a tub of Crisco made from processed vegetable oils. Seniors made superior cooking fat from scraps that cost nothing, and their food tasted better because real animal fat carries flavor. Vegetable shortening never will. When seniors boiled potatoes, they never poured the starchy cooking water down the drain. It became the secret ingredient for making bread rise higher and stay moist longer. The potato water replaced plain water in bread recipes, and the starch acted like extra gluten, creating lighter, fluffier loaves that stayed fresh for days. This trick also meant they could use less expensive yeast because the starch helped fermentation. A simple pot of boiled potatoes produced not just mashed potatoes for dinner, but also the liquid for tomorrow's bread, stretching ingredients twice as far. The bread had a subtle sweetness and tender crumb that modern bread made with tap water can't match. Today we dump potato water down the sink without a thought, then buy $8 artisan bread at the store. Seniors understood that every liquid, every scrap, every byproduct had value if you knew how to use it. These 5 hacks: boiling bones 5 times, making soap from bacon grease, stretching one roast 7 ways, rendering fat from scraps, and using potato water for bread, weren't just frugal tricks. They were survival skills that turned waste into wealth. Today, we throw away what seniors transformed into food, soap, and sustenance. Their genius is lost. Seniors never threw away stale bread because they knew 12 ways to transform it into completely different meals. Bread pudding for dessert, stuffing for chicken, croutons for salad, breadcrumbs for meatloaf filler or casserole topping, French toast for breakfast, bread soup with milk and sugar, fried bread for snacks, panzanella salad with tomatoes, trifle base layered with custard, pie crust crumbs crumbled into meatballs, or soaked in beaten eggs for bread patties. Every single piece of dried-out bread had value and purpose. Stale bread was actually preferred for many recipes because it absorbed liquids better without falling apart. Today we throw away bread the moment it gets hard, wasting millions of loaves annually. Seniors saw stale bread as an ingredient with endless potential, not garbage. Their creativity turned day-old bread into dishes we'd never recognize as leftovers. Every drop of water that touched food was saved and repurposed because seniors understood that cooking water contained dissolved nutrients, starches, and flavors too valuable to waste. Vegetable boiling water became soup base or was used to cook rice. Pasta water with its starch was saved for bread dough or to thicken sauces. Bean soaking water went into gravy for extra body. Potato water made bread. Even the water from washing vegetables was used to water garden plants. Nothing went down the drain. They kept jars of different cooking waters in the icebox, labeled by type, ready for the next meal. This practice cost nothing and added nutrition and flavor to dozens of dishes throughout the week. Today, we dump gallons of nutrient-rich cooking water down the drain, then buy expensive broths and thickeners at the store to replace what we just wasted. When butter was expensive or unavailable, seniors made it stretch twice as far using a clever chemistry trick. They whipped together 1 pound of softened real butter with 1 cup of whole milk, 2 tablespoons of unflavored gelatin dissolved in warm water, and a pinch of salt. The mixture was beaten until fluffy and light, then refrigerated until firm. The result looked, spread, and tasted like real butter but contained half the actual butter, doubled in volume by the milk and gelatin. This depression butter worked perfectly for spreading on bread and baking, though it didn't fry well. 1 pound of butter became 2 pounds of usable spread, cutting the cost in half. Today, butter costs $7 per pound, and we use it straight without thinking. Seniors doubled their butter supply using 10 cents worth of milk and gelatin, proving their genius at stretching expensive ingredients. Seniors turned kitchen waste into free food by regrowing vegetables from scraps that modern cooks throw away. Celery bottoms were placed in shallow water and sprouted new stalks within weeks. Green onion roots regrew endless green tops when kept in water on the windowsill. Carrot tops produced edible greens. Potato eyes were planted in the garden for new potato plants. Ginger root sprouted in pots. Romaine lettuce hearts regrew in water. Even onion bottoms with roots produced new shoots. This required no money, just patience and a sunny spot. One grocery store purchase of celery could provide fresh celery for months. Today we buy vegetables, use them once, and throw away the regenerative parts that could feed us indefinitely. Seniors understood that vegetables want to grow and exploited that biology to create free food from garbage, demonstrating botanical knowledge modern cooks lack completely. When milk went sour, seniors never threw it away. They transformed it into cottage cheese or farmer cheese through a simple heating and straining process. Sour milk was poured into a pot and heated gently until the curds separated from the whey, a process that took about 10 minutes. The curds were strained through cheesecloth, squeezed dry, salted, and either eaten immediately as fresh cottage cheese or pressed into a mold to make farmer cheese that could be sliced. The leftover whey was fed to chickens or pigs or used in bread baking. 1 gallon of spoiled milk produced a pound of fresh cheese that cost nothing because it was made from waste. Today, we pour sour milk down the drain and buy cottage cheese for $5 at the store, never realizing we just threw away the exact same ingredient. Seniors saw sour milk as cheese waiting to happen, not garbage. These 5 additional hacks, turning stale bread into 12 dishes, reusing cooking water, making depression butter, regrowing vegetables from scraps, and making cheese from sour milk, prove seniors never saw waste, only potential. They transformed garbage into food, stretching every ingredient. Today we throw away what they turned into meals. Their wisdom is lost. Seniors never threw away frying oil after one use because they knew how to clarify and extend its life indefinitely through proper straining and storage techniques that modern cooks have completely forgotten. After frying chicken, fish, or potatoes, they let the oil cool completely in the pan, then carefully poured it through several layers of cheesecloth or a clean flour sack into a glass jar, leaving behind all the browned bits and food particles that cause oil to break down and smell rancid. The strained oil was stored in a cool, dark place, usually the pantry or cellar, and could be reused 10, 15, sometimes 20 times before it finally turned too dark or developed an off smell. They kept separate jars for different types of frying, one for chicken, one for fish, one for donuts, so flavors didn't cross-contaminate. Each time they reused the oil, they strained it again, and removing any new particles. This practice meant 1 quart of lard or vegetable oil could last for months of regular frying, reducing the cost of cooking dramatically. The oil actually improved with use for certain applications. Experienced cooks knew that seasoned frying oil produced crispier fried chicken than fresh oil because it had the perfect viscosity and temperature properties. Today, we use frying oil once, maybe twice, then throw it away and buy new bottles for $8 each, wasting gallons of perfectly good oil annually. Seniors understood that oil doesn't wear out if you keep it clean. It just gets better, more flavorful, and more efficient at heat transfer. Their fried foods were crispier, more golden, and cost a fraction of what ours do because they mastered the lost art of oil maintenance and knew that proper care could make one bottle last half a year of regular frying. The ingenuity of Depression-era seniors reached its peak in their ability to create convincing imitations of expensive foods using cheap, readily available ingredients that fooled taste buds and satisfied cravings when real luxuries were impossible to afford. Mock apple pie made from Ritz crackers, lemon juice, sugar, and cinnamon tasted remarkably like real apple pie because the crackers absorbed the spiced syrup and took on a soft, fruit-like texture that mimicked cooked apples perfectly. This recipe actually appeared on Ritz cracker boxes and became famous during the Depression. Mock chicken was made from pork, shoulder pounded thin, breaded, and fried until it had the texture and appearance of fried chicken breast, costing half as much. Mock crab salad used flaked whitefish mixed with mayonnaise, celery, and Old Bay seasoning to create a passable imitation of expensive crab. Mock mincemeat for pies was made from green tomatoes, raisins, apples, and spices instead of costly dried fruits and suet. Mock deviled ham combined ground bologna with pickle relish and mustard. These weren't just desperate substitutions, they were culinary chemistry experiments that proved flavor and texture could be engineered from humble ingredients if you understood the underlying principles of taste, mouthfeel, and aroma. Monsignors knew that our brains identify foods through a combination of sensory inputs, and if you could replicate enough of those inputs, you could create satisfaction without the expense. Today, we either buy the real expensive thing or go without, never considering that creative substitution could deliver 80% of the pleasure at 20% of the cost. The art of making convincing mock foods required deep knowledge of ingredients, cooking chemistry, and sensory perception, skills that have vanished entirely from modern kitchens where we've lost the ability to improvise and adapt. Seniors kept a designated container in their kitchen, usually a bowl or jar, where every vegetable peel, stem, root end, and scrap went instead of the garbage, and when it was full, these scraps became the foundation for rich, flavorful vegetable stock that modern chefs pay premium prices to achieve through the exact same method. Onion skins, which added deep golden color, carrot peels, celery leaves and bottoms, potato skins, tomato cores, pepper stems, mushroom stems, green bean ends, asparagus bottoms, corn cobs, wilted lettuce leaves, broccoli stems, cauliflower cores. Everything that wasn't moldy or dirt-covered went into the scrap collection. When the container was full, the scraps were dumped into a large pot covered with water, brought to a boil, then simmered for 2 to 3 hours until all the flavor, vitamins and minerals had leached into the water. The liquid was strained through cheesecloth, and the resulting vegetable stock was used for cooking rice, making soup, braising meat, deglazing pans, or making gravy. The exhausted vegetable scraps were finally thrown away or composted only after they had given every ounce of value. This practice cost literally nothing because it used what was already destined for garbage, yet it produced quarts of flavorful, a nutritious cooking liquid that enhanced dozens of meals. Today, we throw vegetable scraps directly into the trash, then buy $4 boxes of vegetable broth at the store that contain exactly the same thing we just discarded. Fancy restaurants have rediscovered this technique and call it root-to-stem cooking, charging premium prices for dishes made with vegetable scraps. But seniors did it out of necessity and wisdom, not trendy sustainability. The most versatile and essential skill in the senior cook's arsenal was the ability to create rich, flavorful gravy from any pan drippings, fat remnant, or cooking liquid, transforming simple meals into satisfying comfort food through this universal sauce that stretched meat, moistened dry foods, and added flavor to everything it touched. After frying bacon, the leftover fat and browned bits became breakfast gravy with just flour and milk added. After roasting chicken, the drippings mixed with flour and broth became chicken gravy. After pan-frying pork chops, the fond scraped from the pan with a little water became pork gravy. Even when there was no meat, they made gravy from butter or lard, flour, milk, and salt. This poor man's gravy went over biscuits, potatoes, bread, or rice to create a meal from nearly nothing. The technique was always the same. Keep the fat and drippings in the pan, sprinkle flour over it, stir to make a roux, uncook until golden, then slowly whisk in liquid, water, milk, broth, until thickened. Season with salt and pepper. This took 5 minutes and cost almost nothing, yet it transformed plain food into something that felt substantial and satisfying. Gravy made leftover meat go further by allowing 1 pork chop to serve 2 people when ladled over mashed potatoes. It moistened dry bread and made it edible. It turned plain rice into a side dish. Today, we buy jarred gravy for $4 or gravy packets for $2, never realizing we're paying for something our grandparents made in 5 minutes from pan scraps we wash down the drain. The lost art of gravy making from anything represents the fundamental difference between senior resourcefulness and modern waste. When eggs were expensive or scarce, seniors knew how to make 2 eggs feed 4 people through a simple dilution technique that modern cooks would consider cheating, but actually produces fluffier, more tender scrambled eggs that many chefs now advocate. For every 2 eggs, they added 2 to 3 tablespoons of water or milk before beating, which increased the volume significantly when cooked. The liquid turned to steam during cooking, creating air pockets that made the eggs light and fluffy rather than dense and rubbery. This meant 1 dozen eggs, which might normally feed 6 people for breakfast, could stretch to feed 12 with the same level of satisfaction because the eggs appeared more voluminous on the plate and had a lighter, more appealing texture. The trick worked because eggs are protein and fat, which set when heated, and the added liquid gets trapped in the protein structure as it cooks, creating a foam-like consistency. Seniors also stretched eggs by making dishes where eggs were mixed with other ingredients. Egg salad with extra mayonnaise and celery, scrambled eggs with diced potatoes and onions, frittatas packed with vegetables, or egg drop soup where 1 egg creates ribbons throughout an entire pot of broth. Today, we use eggs straight, without considering that they can be extended, and we pay $6 for a dozen eggs that could feed twice as many people if we knew this simple trick. The concept of stretching eggs seems foreign now, but it represented the fundamental principle that expensive protein could be diluted with cheap fillers or liquids without sacrificing satisfaction or nutrition. These 5 hacks, clarifying oil 10 times, making mock foods from cheap ingredients, saving vegetable scraps for stock, making gravy from anything, and stretching eggs with water, weren't desperate measures. They were genius techniques that turned waste into wealth and expensive into affordable. Today, we throw away what seniors transformed into meals, pure wisdom lost. After making applesauce or apple pie, seniors saved every peel and core to ferment into homemade vinegar through a simple process that cost nothing and produced tangy vinegar for cooking, cleaning, and preserving that was identical to store-bought versions. The apple scraps were placed in a large glass jar or crock, covered with water, and 2 tablespoons of sugar per cup of water were stirred in to feed the fermentation. The container was covered with a cloth, secured with string, to allow air in while keeping bugs out, and left in a warm, dark place for 2 to 3 weeks. During this time, wild yeasts and bacteria naturally present on the apple skins converted the sugars into alcohol. Then Acetobacter bacteria converted the alcohol into acetic acid, vinegar. The mixture was stirred every few days, and when it smelled and tasted sour like vinegar, it was strained through cheesecloth and bottled. This homemade apple cider vinegar was used for salad dressings, pickling vegetables, cleaning windows, and even as a health tonic diluted in water. One batch of apple peels produced quarts of vinegar that lasted months. And today we throw apple scraps in the trash and buy vinegar for $3 per bottle, never knowing we just discarded the exact same ingredient. Seniors understood fermentation chemistry and exploited natural processes to create pantry staples from waste. This knowledge allowed them to be completely self-sufficient, producing their own acidic ingredients for cooking and preservation without spending a cent, while modern cooks remain dependent on store-bought products and have lost all understanding of how fermentation works, or how easy it is to make your own vinegar from kitchen scraps. For months before refrigeration was common or affordable, seniors preserved meat for months without spoilage through salt curing and sun-drying techniques that date back thousands of years but have been completely forgotten by modern cooks who rely entirely on electric refrigeration and freezers. When they butchered a hog or bought a large cut of beef, they couldn't eat it all immediately. So they cut it into thin strips, rubbed every surface heavily with coarse salt, which drew out moisture where bacteria grow, and hung the strips on lines or racks in direct sunlight for several days until the meat was completely dried, hard, and darkened. The salt and dehydration created an environment where bacteria couldn't survive, essentially mummifying the meat. This salt-cured dried meat was called jerky and could be stored in cloth bags or jars at room temperature for 6 months to a year without refrigeration. To use it, they rehydrated pieces in water or broth, then cooked it into stews, beans, or gravies where it added intense flavor and protein. Similarly, they made salt pork by packing pork belly in barrels filled with coarse salt, creating a preserved meat that lasted all winter and flavored countless pots of beans and greens. This preservation method cost almost nothing, just salt and sunshine, yet it allowed families to keep meat year-round without electricity. Today, we buy expensive jerky at gas stations for $8 per small bag, never realizing our ancestors made it at home from fresh meat for pennies. The lost knowledge of salt preservation and sun-drying meant seniors could buy meat in bulk when it was cheap, preserve it themselves, and never worry about spoilage, giving them food security modern people can't imagine without a working freezer. When baking powder cost money seniors didn't have, they made their own from 2 cheap ingredients that were always in the pantry: baking soda and cream of tartar, mixed in the correct ratio to create the exact same chemical reaction that makes biscuits and cakes rise. The formula was simple: 2 parts cream of tartar to 1 part baking soda, mixed thoroughly and stored in an airtight container. When a recipe called for 1 teaspoon of baking powder, they used 1 teaspoon of their homemade mixture instead. And it worked identically because baking powder is nothing but baking soda, a base, plus cream of tartar, an acid, plus cornstarch, to keep it dry. Seniors skipped the cornstarch and it worked fine. This meant they could bake biscuits, cakes, muffins, and quick breads whenever they wanted without spending money on commercial baking powder. A small container of homemade baking powder cost about 10 cents and lasted for months of baking, whereas store-bought baking powder cost 50 cents or more. Some seniors even made their own baking soda by saving wood ashes from the fireplace, leaching them with water to extract lye, then neutralizing the lye with vinegar to create a crude form of sodium bicarbonate, though this process was more complex and less common. Today we buy baking powder for $4 without thinking, never realizing it's just two ingredients mixed together that we probably already own. Seniors understood the chemistry of leavening agents and refused to pay for convenience when they could make it themselves for a fraction of the cost. Before electric refrigerators were affordable, seniors kept perishable foods cool using newspaper and water through an evaporative cooling technique that dropped food temperature by 20 degrees and extended freshness for days without electricity or ice. They would wrap meat, butter, cheese, or leftovers in several layers of newspaper, then soak the entire newspaper-wrapped bundle in cold water until saturated. The wet package was hung in the basement or cellar where it was cool and had airflow, or placed near an open window. As the water evaporated from the newspaper, it drew heat away from the food inside through evaporative cooling, the same principle that makes you feel cold when you step out of a swimming pool and air hits your wet skin. The newspaper was re-wetted twice a day to maintain cooling. This method kept butter from melting, prevented milk from souring as quickly, and kept meat fresh an extra 2 to 3 days. It cost nothing except newspaper and water, yet it functioned as a primitive refrigerator that made food storage possible in hot weather. Today, we can't imagine keeping food without a refrigerator, but seniors successfully preserved perishables for days using just wet newspaper and physics. This technique was especially crucial during heat waves when food spoiled within hours. The knowledge of evaporative cooling and its application to food storage represented practical thermodynamics that modern cooks never learned, because we've always had electric refrigeration and can't conceive of life without it. Seniors made ice cream at home without an expensive ice cream maker by using 2 different-sized coffee cans, ice, salt, and the physics of freezing point depression to create smooth, creamy ice cream through simple shaking and rolling. Heavy cream, sugar, and vanilla were mixed in a small 1-pound coffee can, and the lid was taped on securely. That small can was placed inside a larger 3-pound coffee can, and the space between them was packed with crushed ice mixed with rock salt. The salt lowered the freezing point of the ice, making it colder than 32 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze the cream mixture. The outer can's lid was taped on, and the whole thing was rolled back and forth on the floor or shaken vigorously for 10 to 15 minutes until the cream mixture inside froze into ice cream. Kids considered this a fun activity, rolling the can around the kitchen while the adults talked. When they opened the inner can, they had fresh homemade ice cream that cost about 50 cents for a quart. Store-bought ice cream cost $2. This method worked because the super-cold salted ice surrounding the inner can pulled heat from the cream faster than a regular freezer, and the constant agitation prevented large ice crystals from forming, creating a smooth texture. Today, we buy ice cream makers for $50 or buy ice cream at the store for $8 per pint, never knowing we could make it at home with 2 coffee cans and ingredients we already have. These 5 hacks: making vinegar from apple scraps, unsalt-curing meat, making baking powder, using newspaper as refrigerator, and making ice cream in coffee cans, prove seniors were chemistry and physics masters. They understood evaporation, fermentation, preservation, and freezing point depression. Today, we buy what they made free from garbage. Genius completely lost. Seniors living through the Depression and post-war years when fuel was expensive or scarce mastered the art of stacking multiple pots on a single wood-burning stove or open fire, cooking an entire day's worth of meals simultaneously to conserve precious firewood or coal that cost money they didn't have to spend. The technique required careful planning and understanding of heat distribution. The hottest spot directly over the fire cooked foods that needed high heat like frying or boiling water, while pots placed on the cooler edges of the stovetop or hung on hooks above the fire cooked slower dishes like beans, stews, or rice that needed gentle simmering for hours. As each dish finished, another pot would take its place, maximizing fuel efficiency. They also used the oven space inside wood stoves to bake bread, roast meat, and cook casseroles simultaneously, with careful attention to what needed higher versus lower temperatures. This meant one load of firewood that might cost a quarter or one afternoon of chopping could produce 3 meals for a family instead of requiring separate fires for each meal. Today, we turn on gas or electric burners individually, using energy wastefully without thinking, and our utility bills reflect that carelessness. They knew which dishes could cook together, how to arrange pots for optimal heat distribution, how to maintain consistent temperature with minimal fuel, and how to time everything so meals finished in the proper sequence. This skill represented not just frugality, but deep knowledge of cooking science, fire management, and meal planning that allowed them to feed families on almost no fuel cost. One of the most shocking Depression-era inventions was water pie, a dessert made without any fruit, eggs, or milk that somehow tasted sweet, rich, and satisfying enough to serve at Sunday dinner when there was absolutely nothing else available for dessert and families desperately wanted something sweet to end the meal. The recipe sounds completely insane. A pie crust filled with 1½ cups of cold water, 3/4 cup of white sugar, 2 tablespoons of butter cut into small pieces, 1 tablespoon of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and a pinch of salt, baked at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 45 minutes until the top developed a golden caramelized crust, and the filling mysteriously transformed into a custard-like layer that resembled chess pie or sugar cream pie in texture and flavor. The magic happened through chemistry. During baking, the butter melted and emulsified with the water, the sugar dissolved, and then caramelized on the top surface where it was exposed to direct heat. The flour thickened the mixture slightly and helped it set, and the vanilla provided aromatic flavor compounds that tricked the brain into perceiving richness and complexity. The result wasn't just barely edible or merely tolerable, it was genuinely delicious, with a crispy, sugary top layer that crackled when you broke through it with a fork, a tender, custardy middle layer that had a smooth, pudding-like consistency, and a buttery flavor throughout that satisfied dessert cravings completely. Seniors made water pie when they had flour, sugar, and butter, but no fruit, no eggs, no cream, basically nothing else. Seniors didn't throw the cobs away because they knew those seemingly useless cobs contained enough natural sugars and corn flavor to be boiled with sugar and transformed into corn cob jelly or corn syrup that tasted remarkably sweet, delicious, and unique, a homemade preserve that couldn't be purchased in any store. The process was simple but required time and patience. 6 to 8 stripped corn cobs were broken in half and placed in a large pot with just enough water to barely cover them, and then boiled vigorously for 30 to 45 minutes, releasing their residual sugars, starches, and that distinctive sweet corn flavor into the cooking water. The cobs were removed with tongs and discarded, finally after giving everything they had, and the liquid was carefully strained through several layers of cheesecloth to remove any silk strands or debris, producing a clear, pale yellow liquid that smelled faintly of sweet corn. For every cup of this corn liquid, Monsignors measured out exactly 1 cup of white granulated sugar and half a packet of powdered fruit pectin, or a tablespoon of lemon juice if pectin wasn't available. This mixture was brought to a hard, rolling boil that couldn't be stirred down and was boiled for exactly 10 minutes, while being stirred constantly to prevent scorching. The hot liquid was immediately poured into sterilized jars and sealed with paraffin wax or canning lids. Today we shuck corn, cut off the kernels, and throw the cobs straight into the trash or compost bin without a second thought, never knowing they contain enough natural sugar to make real, legitimate syrup that tastes good enough to preserve and eat all winter. Seniors understood that corn cobs weren't waste or garbage. They were a secondary harvest, hiding in plain sight, full of extractable flavor and sweetness that could be captured with nothing but water, heat, sugar, and pectin. Made yeast from potato and hops. Commercial yeast cost money that could be spent on other necessities, so seniors who baked bread regularly, which was most of them since store-bought bread was expensive and homemade bread was a staple of every meal, made their own yeast starter at home using boiled potatoes and hops, to creating a live culture of wild yeasts and beneficial bacteria that could leaven bread indefinitely as long as they kept feeding it and maintaining it properly. The process began by peeling and boiling one medium russet potato in 2 cups of water until it was completely soft and falling apart. They mashed the cooked potato directly into its cooking water, creating a thick, starchy liquid. To this warm, not hot, potato water, they added 1 tablespoon of white sugar to feed the yeast, and a small handful of dried hops, either wild hops they gathered themselves or hops purchased cheaply from the pharmacy where it was sold as a medicinal herb for making sleep tonics. The mixture was poured into a glass jar or crock, covered loosely with a cloth secured with string to allow air circulation while keeping insects out, and left at room temperature in a warm spot for 2 to 3 days. During this time, wild yeasts naturally present in the air, on the potato skin, and in the environment landed on the mixture and began feeding on the sugars, multiplying rapidly and fermenting the liquid. Bubbles appeared, the mixture became foamy and active, and it developed a distinctive yeasty, slightly sour, beer-like smell that indicated successful fermentation. This was the starter, or mother yeast. To keep it alive indefinitely, they stored it in a cool place and fed it once a week with a spoonful of flour and a spoonful of sugar. When real chocolate and cocoa powder were completely unaffordable luxuries during the worst years of the Depression, seniors discovered through desperate experimentation that burnt toast scraped into fine crumbs and mixed with sugar created a surprisingly convincing chocolate-like flavor in puddings, cakes, and frostings, providing children with at least the illusion and psychological satisfaction of chocolate dessert when the real thing was impossible to buy. The technique involved deliberately burning several slices of bread until they were deeply charred, black, and smoking far beyond the point of being edible as toast. They scraped off all the burnt, blackened surface with a knife, collecting the charred scrapings, then crushed these burnt pieces into a fine, dark powder using a mortar and pestle, or by wrapping them in a cloth and pounding with a rolling pin until they resembled coarse cocoa powder. This burnt bread powder was intensely bitter and dark brown to black in color, and when mixed with enough sugar, butter, milk, and vanilla extract, it produced a brown, slightly bittersweet flavor that children who had never tasted real chocolate accepted as chocolate because they had no point of comparison, and their desperate minds filled in the sensory gaps. They made chocolate frosting by beating together butter, powdered sugar, burnt toast powder, a splash of milk, and vanilla until it was spreadable and brown. During the Depression and war years, when fabric was expensive and new clothing was a luxury most families couldn't afford, flour companies began printing their 25-pound and 50-pound flour sacks with colorful floral patterns, gingham checks, and decorative designs, specifically so poor families could reuse the sturdy cotton cloth to sew clothing, dish towels, pillowcases, quilts, and other household textiles. And seniors became expert seamstresses who transformed these humble packaging materials into entire wardrobes for their families. The flour sacks were made from high-quality, tightly woven cotton that was actually superior to much of the cheap fabric sold in stores, and it washed beautifully, softened with repeated laundering, and lasted for years of hard use. After emptying the flour into their storage canisters, seniors would soak the empty sacks in warm water to loosen and remove the printed brand name and company information. Some forward-thinking companies even used special water-soluble ink specifically to make this removal easier and help their customers. The sacks were then washed thoroughly, dried in the sun, and ironed smooth, producing rectangles of clean, ready-to-use fabric. 3 to 4 flour sacks provided enough fabric to cut and sew a child's dress using simple patterns. 6 to 8 sacks made a woman's house dress or apron. Men's work shirts required about 10 sacks. They made underwear, nightgowns, baby diapers, dish towels, handkerchiefs, curtains, and quilt squares from flour sack fabric, and nothing was wasted. Even the smallest scraps were saved for doll clothes or stuffed into pillows. 2 women became skilled at carefully selecting flour brands at the grocery store based on which sacks had the prettiest patterns or colors that would coordinate with fabric they already had at home, essentially shopping for fabric while buying flour they needed anyway. Young girls proudly wore flour sack dresses to school and church, and if the sewing was done skillfully with proper seams and hems, most people couldn't tell they were wearing repurposed packaging unless they looked very closely. The practice was so common that it carried no social stigma. Everyone was doing it, and the quality was often better than store-bought garments. This meant a family's clothing budget essentially became zero because garments cost only the price of the flour, which they were buying anyway for baking, plus thread for sewing, making clothing virtually free. Flour companies actually competed for customers by offering the most attractive sack designs, hiring professional designers to create fashionable patterns that would appeal to women shoppers. Seniors never threw away eggshells after cracking eggs for cooking because they understood that shells were pure calcium carbonate, the exact same mineral compound found in expensive calcium supplement pills that could be safely consumed by humans and animals as a nutritional supplement, added to garden soil as fertilizer to prevent calcium deficiency in tomatoes and peppers, or used in various household applications that required abrasive or alkaline materials. After using eggs in recipes, they carefully saved every single shell in a designated bowl, rinsed them clean of any raw egg residue to prevent smell or bacterial growth, and spread them on a baking sheet to dry completely either in a low oven, 200 degrees Fahrenheit, for about 10 minutes, to sterilize them, or in the sun, where UV light killed any remaining bacteria. Once the shells were completely dried and brittle, they were crushed into fine powder using a mortar and pestle, a tool every kitchen had, or by placing them in a cloth flour sack and pounding with a rolling pin or mallet until they became a fine, on chalk-like powder that could be easily incorporated into food or dissolved in liquid. This eggshell calcium powder was stirred into morning oatmeal, where the porridge's soft texture disguised any grittiness added to bread dough, where it mixed invisibly into the flour, mixed into ground meat for meatloaf or meatballs, or dissolved in acidic liquids like lemon juice, vinegar, or orange juice, where the acid chemically reacted with the calcium carbonate and broke it down into calcium ions that the body could absorb and use. Crushed eggshells were also used as a gentle abrasive for scrubbing pots and pans, and scattered around garden plants to deter slugs and snails whose soft bodies couldn't crawl over the sharp edges. A jar of crushed, sterilized eggshells sitting on the pantry shelf represented free calcium supplementation that would otherwise have cost money to purchase as pills at the pharmacy. Today, we crack eggs, throw the shells straight into the trash or compost without a thought, then buy calcium supplements at the drugstore for $15 to $20 per bottle, completely unaware that we just discarded the exact same mineral in a more bioavailable form. Seniors understood that eggshells were far too valuable to waste. They represented concentrated calcium that could strengthen human bones, improve animal health, enhance garden productivity, and serve multiple household purposes, all without costing a single cent beyond the eggs themselves. Salt commercial toothpaste cost money that Depression-era seniors simply didn't have for non-essential purchases when food itself was scarce. So they made their own tooth-cleaning powder from two ingredients that were always present in every pantry: baking soda and table salt, mixed together in equal proportions and stored in a small glass jar with a tight lid beside the kitchen sink or bathroom washstand. To brush their teeth, they wet the toothbrush bristles with plain water, dipped the damp brush directly into the powder mixture until the bristles were coated, and scrubbed their teeth using circular motions exactly as they would with store-bought toothpaste, spending 2 to 3 minutes brushing all surfaces. The baking soda, sodium bicarbonate, provided gentle but effective abrasive action that mechanically removed food particles, plaque, and surface stains from tooth enamel, while also neutralizing acids in the mouth that are produced by bacteria and cause tooth decay and cavities. The salt added additional mild abrasive power that helped polish teeth and acted as a natural antibacterial and antiseptic agent that killed harmful oral bacteria and reduced gum inflammation and bleeding. After brushing, they rinsed thoroughly with plain water, and their mouths felt clean, fresh, and slightly tingly from the salt. This homemade toothpaste powder cost approximately 5 cents for a 4-ounce jar that lasted an entire family several months of twice-daily brushing, whereas store-bought toothpaste in tubes cost 30 to 50 cents and was gone in weeks. Some seniors added a single drop of peppermint extract, wintergreen oil, or clove oil to the powder mixture to provide a more pleasant, refreshing flavor and mask the slightly salty, alkaline taste of the plain mixture, making it more palatable, especially for children. Dentists and doctors of that era actually approved of and even recommended this homemade tooth powder because baking soda and salt effectively clean teeth, maintain oral health, and prevent decay without any of the unnecessary additives, artificial colors, sweeteners, or chemicals found in commercial toothpastes that served no actual cleaning purpose. Seniors who used this simple homemade tooth powder their entire lives often had remarkably good dental health and kept most of their natural teeth into old age because they brushed regularly and faithfully with an effective cleaning agent and didn't consume the constant stream of sugary sodas, candies, and processed foods that modern people eat constantly between meals. Today we buy toothpaste in tubes for $5 to $8 that contains mostly water, foaming agents, artificial flavoring, food coloring, and preservatives, along with the same basic cleaning agents, sodium bicarbonate and sometimes salt, that our grandparents used for pennies. The lost knowledge of homemade toothpaste represents yet another area where seniors refuse to pay money for commercial convenience when they could make an equally effective or even superior product at home for almost nothing, successfully maintaining their oral health and hygiene without spending money they didn't have. Long before plastic storage containers were invented and marketed as kitchen essentials, our seniors reused the cylindrical cardboard oatmeal boxes, especially the tall, iconic Quaker Oats containers, as versatile, free, all-purpose kitchen and household storage that lasted for years, with careful use and cost absolutely nothing because they came automatically included with the oatmeal purchase that families bought regularly anyway. The Quaker Oats boxes were especially prized and sought after because they were tall, large capacity, made from thick, sturdy, a moisture-resistant cardboard that could withstand repeated opening and closing, and featured tight-fitting lids that sealed well enough to keep contents fresh and protected from humidity, insects, and rodents. After the family finished eating the oatmeal, seniors would wipe out the interior of the box completely with a damp cloth to remove any residual oat dust or flakes, let it dry thoroughly, and then immediately repurpose it for long-term storage of other dry pantry staples like uncooked rice, dried beans, granulated sugar, all-purpose flour, ground coffee, loose tea leaves, dried pasta, raw nuts, or raisins. The tight-fitting lid kept everything fresh and prevented pantry moths and weevils from infesting the food. They also used oatmeal boxes to organize and store cooking utensils, standing wooden spoons, spatulas, whisks, and serving spoons upright in a box placed on the kitchen counter for easy access during meal preparation. Beyond the kitchen, oatmeal boxes became organizational tools throughout the house. Sewing supplies like thread spools, needles, pins, and buttons, craft materials and children's crayons and colored pencils, hardware like nails, screws, thumbtacks, and picture hooks, clothespins for the laundry line, rubber bands and twist ties, old letters, receipts, and important documents, on seed packets for the garden, and countless other small items that needed contained storage. Some creative seniors decorated their oatmeal boxes by covering the exterior with pretty fabric scraps, leftover wallpaper, adhesive shelf paper, or hand-painted designs to make them more attractive and coordinate with their kitchen or room decor. Children used oatmeal boxes for homemade coin banks, pencil holders, toy storage, and craft projects. The cylindrical boxes, stacked neatly on pantry shelves, could be easily labeled with the contents using a pencil or pen and were sturdy enough to last for years if treated carefully. This meant seniors never needed to spend money buying specialized storage containers. They accumulated an entire collection of free, functional containers simply through normal grocery shopping as they purchased oatmeal that their families ate for breakfast anyway. Today, we finish a container of oatmeal, immediately recycle or discard the cardboard container without a thought, and then drive to the store to buy plastic storage containers that cost $5 to $15 each, spending significant money on something our grandparents obtained completely free as a byproduct of buying food. The single most fundamental, frequently used, and universally practiced technique in the senior cook's complete arsenal of frugal cooking methods was the concept of stretcher dishes, meals specifically designed where expensive protein ingredients like meat, chicken, or fish were deliberately and strategically extended, diluted or bulked up with cheap filling starches and carbohydrates like oatmeal, breadcrumbs, cooked rice, mashed potatoes, or beans to make a small, an inadequate amount of costly protein feed significantly more people without anyone at the table feeling cheated, unsatisfied, or like they were eating poverty food. Meatloaf was the absolute classic and most iconic stretcher dish in American cooking. 1 pound of ground beef, which alone would only feed 3 people if formed into plain hamburgers, was mixed thoroughly with 1 full cup of uncooked oatmeal or dried breadcrumbs, 1 beaten egg to bind everything together. finely diced onion for flavor, ketchup or tomato sauce for moisture, and seasonings like salt, pepper, and Worcestershire sauce, then formed into a loaf shape and baked until firm. Casseroles were inherently, and by definition, stretchers. 1 cup of diced leftover chicken or turkey mixed with 2 cups of cooked white rice, a can of cream of mushroom soup for sauce and moisture, a cup of frozen peas for vegetables topped with crushed crackers or breadcrumbs, and baked until bubbly created a dish that served 6 people when the chicken alone would have served only 2. These 30 kitchen hacks weren't tricks. They were survival skills passed down through generations of seniors who lived through the Depression, 2 world wars, and save your bacon grease, make stock from scraps, stretch your eggs, render your own lard. These 30 hacks aren't relics. Bring them back before they vanish forever.